All right, so our speaker today is Mike Antos from Santec Consulting, and you can see his bio on the slide. I don't want to read it necessarily, but just want to highlight that Mike was one of the co-chairs at part of the RAC that convened and developed the RD&D plan. And so gonna let Mike speak. He was part, Micah, you'll have to tell us which, I think you were policy and people, but I'm not sure I have it right, so I'll let you correct me. But I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. So yeah, I'm Mike Antos, and I was part of the People and Water subcommittee, the co-chair, along with Jose from the department, who was the other co-chair there. So it's really exciting to get a chance to give this talk and to be the inaugural LunchMAR speaker. I'm going to get that on my resume. And I'm really excited about the informal mode. And those of you that have seen me over the years, I appreciate. And actually, I bring the informal mode even when I'm in a formal place. It's just part of me. So it's really exciting to be aligned with the actual agenda this time, as opposed to being totally confounding to it. So could I get the next slide? Is there a way for me to do that, or do you have to do it?
Mike, if you have the presentation and you want to pull it up, I think we can let you share. If you prefer.
Oh, that's okay. I'll just ask.
Okay.
So one of the things we've talked about, this idea of a network for FloodMAR in the past, and those of you that were at the convening last year saw it, and anyone who was part of the RAC also saw this idea come up. And it really came from something that the Research Advisory Committee recognized about itself, that the group really appreciated being able to get together and sparking each other's idea and thinking and sharing about what was going on amongst them, that became very valuable to them. All the members of that group really appreciated being part of that group. And then also they really recognized the value of being able to network together and produce something as significant as the RDD plan. Now, of course, most of the work of that plan was the work of staff and consultants to the department, but the engagement of the Research Advisory Committee, both the informal benefit that they received of sort of gathering and sparking each other's ideas and getting to know one another, but then also the formal contribution they made, which was to help steer that plan, were both things that they recognized had a lot of utility. And from that came a recommendation by the Research Advisory Committee to establish a network. Next slide. So I had the good fortune of being there in the room, and I was able to proselytize for this book. Can somebody mute Doug? Thanks. I was able to proselytize for this book. I was introduced to this book by meeting the first author there, Paul Van de Ventner, years ago. And this it's a little tiny guidebook, and I think somebody's going to drop a link to it in the chat if anybody feels like going out and buying it. My understanding is there was a run on it from the last time I presented, so go for it. The idea is that they're distinguishing between a network and an organization. And what they mean by that is that when we as people sort of living in this modern society, when we think about groups of people doing something together, we default to these understandings of how organizations function. But a network is actually something very different. And we use the word network all the time in our vocabulary, and it refers to all sorts of things. It refers to the internet, it refers to news stations, it refers to the people that you know. There's lots of different ways that we use the word. But in the context that we're talking about at FloodMAR, is that it's an idea of bringing organizations together to work in concert around a common defined purpose as equal partners, right? So in an organization, you end up having a mission, and you assign a leader and staff, and they accomplish that mission. And they may have advisors or stakeholders, but the organization has its internal momentum all of its own, with some sort of hierarchical system for decision-making and pursuing that mission. A network is different. It is a group of those organizations coming together to help each other be better at their day job. So the organizations aren't necessarily changing what they do. they are working together to be better at what each of them does separately. Next slide. So some of the other key features of network, and this is all out of this guidebook, and from more broad social science literature, of course, too, is that this idea of network, it's the members are organizations, not just individual people. So a person, now in our universe here in water in California, a person may be their own organization, right? We have those kinds of advocates and stakeholders and retirees and such that are participating sort of on their own recognizance. But in the context of a network, they're acting as an organization rather than just as themselves. So if a organization sends someone to participate in a network convening, the point is for them to be representing the organization, right? So this is really something that organizations commit to. And then the members, that is those organizations, they make an investment in the relationships of this network based on interdependencies that they come to understand. So in the context of LunchMAR, there's a lot of things that a lot of different actors in California need to become involved one way or the other. But because of the interdependencies that are embedded in LunchMAR, whether it's just flood and aquifer recharge, those are just two ideas, but there are a whole suite of things that are involved in making LunchMAR function. The people who are invested in all those different elements who want to become involved in LunchMAR would benefit by being networked with the people who have a focus on a different piece. Now, the other piece about networks is they can have different levels of complexity, and those complexities bring different levels of commitment that produce different levels of risk for the members. And in this case, risk means how much are you investing and how much are you willing to change and how much are you expecting to get from your commitment to being a member. And then networks really are key in this way in that no one really is in charge. It is a collective effort to share resources, so you give and you get. The goal being is that you give something that someone else needs and you get something that someone else gave. And it really becomes a reciprocal relationship-based interdependent activity that helps everyone advance their home job, their day job. Next slide. Did you go the right direction? Okay. So when it's time to form a network, there's these sort of 4 key questions that you need to ask ourselves. And when I say ourselves, I'm talking about the people who are deciding to form the network. Now, everyone on this talk might not be the people who might not represent the organizations that quote unquote join this network, right? So the question needs to be asked of the people who are ready to build and invest in and gain from a network. The question is, do we really want to do this? And what's been pretty clear across the Research Advisory Committee and the feedback we received at the convening last year, that the answer is kind of yes, that there is a core group of people who represent organizations that have a buy-in, that are buying into this idea of having a LunchMAR network. And then sort of the next key question to ask you is, what do we, the network, hope to accomplish? And that question is sort of underway. And it's underway in a couple of ways that I'll explain as we move forward. Then the next 2 questions are ones that still need to be answered by this group that's starting to build this network. Who needs to be there? And what happens is that everyone who thinks they need to be there decides whether they want to be there or not. That's part of that who question. But then the folks that are there and have thought through about what they want to accomplish need to look around and say, who are we missing that we need to make sure we bring in? And it was really interesting to see that both federal and tribal representatives aren't present, or at least weren't present when we asked that survey question earlier in the call, right? That may be a key element for that who question. Who do we need to have on board? Are there key people that are missing? And then this last question is, how do we fund a network's activities? And fund here immediately draws you to dollar signs, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It's how do we make sure that the resources are necessary for the network to succeed? And that could be a Zoom platform. It could be who's got time to set up the meetings, right? It could be an actual allocation of dollars to hire someone to help coordinate the network. There's lots of different ways that that fund can be, I could put it in quotes, right? Fund, how do we make sure that the network's activities have the appropriate investment such that they can go forward? Next slide, somewhere in here we have a zoom, yeah, okay. So we have a little poll popping up here, and in the playful nature of me and of LunchMAR, it's a little bit of a playful poll, so why don't you go ahead and hit it, and we'll see what everybody thinks.
So Mike, if you want to hum a song to go along with the polls, feel free to.
Was that a copyright violation?
All right, so I'm going to close it in just a couple of seconds, making sure everybody had a chance to respond. And some of you have responded, not sure, need more information. So maybe you can use the chat panel to identify what information you would need in order to be able to answer that question. And I'm going to share the results with everyone. Here you go, Mike.
That's great. Yeah, so it seems like the majority of you are yes or probably yes, and that's fun. And the not sure, need more information is, I tried to convince everybody to not include that option, so everyone had to actually get off the fence. But okay, I hear you, you 22%. We'll figure it out together. Okay, next slide. So when it talks about the different levels of complexity in the networks, the guidebook and elsewhere, it talks about sort of the increasing complexity and these three kind of containers. And like all containers, they're tempting to use, but actually in practice, you end up sort of flexing between them. The lines are not solid lines, they're flexible lines. But in the way that this book particularly talks about it, and the way that we've talked about it before in relation to FloodMAR, is these three sort of types. And again, they become more complex the further down you go. And sort of the least complex is a cooperating network, and that's the word that's used in this particular text. And you can think about the sorts of things that a cooperating network would do is that it would create these environments where people get to know each other and have stronger relationships. And those relationships can then play out into all sorts of benefits down the road, but the network really focuses on just establishing those networks and that familiarity. It's also an opportunity to model and explain best practices to each other, so people can say, like, this is a project that we've completed and here's the lessons we learned, the things that worked, the things that didn't, and everybody sort of learns that from each other. And that really talks about that sharing information. And then you can also convene around particular problem solving or issue discussion sessions. So it's an opportunity to, for the most part, get to know each other and teach each other what each other knows, and maybe do some problem solving together. If you move up to a slightly more complex network, you do capture all those things in the cooperating network, but then you also bring in things like identifying and pursuing advocacy or service priorities. So the network, the organizations that make up the network can decide to act in concert together on some initiative or some position of advocacy. You also then can start thinking about ways to push the boundaries of your organizations, right? So how do we stretch our organization based on the things that we've learned? Where do we see that there's gaps between members of the network that we can fill in together? How do we both reach and stretch? And then, of course, you start building stronger relationships, and you develop this idea of mutual reliance, or the ability to provide mutual aid. And of course, all of these things are things we're thinking a lot about these days. And then sort of the most complex version in this layout is a collaborating network. And this is the one that, again, does the things that came before it. But here, the group is coming together to pursue a fundamental long-term change, right? And there's a lot of risk here because it's essentially signing on to change, that you're there to learn how to be different and therefore better at something that, and it really could lead to fundamental changes for organizations, mergers. You can close down NGOs who realize their mission is complete, right? It can be relatively significant change actions from a collaborating network. This idea of permanently or radically altering or shifting the ways that you operate, and then also redefine systems in the way that the various roles get played in a larger system. And there's some really great examples in the book of collaborating networks, but they're ones where a bunch of nonprofits come together and come to realize that their missions are either well aligned, so they merge, or that they are missing an entire topic space, or they're overlapping, and therefore one should move into a new space. So there's a lot of potential here in a collaborating network to really pursue a change path. And so these are the sort of the hierarchical steps of network. And it was really interesting, the first time I presented this, we asked a poll, and we're about to ask it again, of the participants at the convening about which of these they thought would be the right target for the initial steps of the LunchMAR network. So if LunchMAR network was trying to get stood up today, and it is, right, from your perspective, which of these network types might be the best one to aim at? Now, of course, again, the lines are not solid, right? We could be a little bit here, a little bit there. We can grab bits and pieces from different parts of this. But the question is, if we were targeting one of these as our starting point, so then when we gather and start fleshing it out, which of these would you pick? So that's the next poll question. So you go ahead and move to that. Can you go back to the table in the background for everybody? Is that possible?
Is that helpful? You can see it? It's not covered.
I think everyone has control over their polls window on their own, and they can move it to the side if they want.
Okay. All right, so we heard from about half of you. So maybe just a couple of seconds in case you're still thinking, and then I'll close the poll.
Yeah, this is not the final time you get to ask this question or answer this question. No pressure.
All right, so here are the results. Quite the mix, Mike.
Yeah, it's scattered across. Again, I am startled at how many people are picking collaborating network. Maybe I'm not describing it all the way. It's or maybe there's a lot more transformational change minds in this audience than I expected, and that's really great news.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Cool. Next slide. So those of you that participated in the Zoom, was it 2 weeks ago? And then earlier as well, saw this graphic by Ajay from DWR. And he talked about how these are kind of the efforts that DWR has underway. This triangle that he shared was the watershed studies that are underway at various scales. So there are some big and some small. The pilot projects are also at multiple scales, a watershed, district, and farm, and others. And then working on guidance. So that's the plan and the technical memos and forums. And one of the things that I don't know, it didn't get asked at the last meeting, and we really thought it'd be useful, is given this space, this is what DWR is doing at the moment to advance LunchMAR. And we're going to ask you in the next poll to share which of these is that you're most engaged with, or you think is most close to what you're working on. So we asked the question better than I just did, but there's another poll right away. Here it is. So you have to pick one of these threes or none of them to let us know what you think is most important to you for what DWR is currently working on.
Mike, while the poll's going on, this is Jenny. Can I ask you a question from the chat?
You can, if I'm back to you. Sorry, my audio got pulled over by my telephone.
No.
Go ahead. Ask a question. Ask away.
So about the different types of networks, the question was, those are also developmental phases, correct? You might go from cooperating to coordinating to collaborating as you build the network.
It's entirely possible that a network can move up or down that list of options as it grows and works over time. So you could start at coordinating and work your way up to collaborating over time, but it doesn't necessarily have to go that direction. It could go either direction. But you're right that, and again, because those lines are artificially solid, it's not necessarily a stepwise guide in that way, but that's entirely right. You can kind of go up or down that chart. Pilot projects are the winner.
It's interesting to see that, given the RAC discussions around the need for guidance, to see that people are looking for pilots and studies to see what it looks like in the field.
Yeah, it is interesting that yeah, we can learn a lot from the pilot projects, right? And you know, distinguishing between a study and a pilot, and you know, sometimes that's a little fungible. But yeah, this is an interesting poll. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, and I see Thomas Harder made the point to say that he picked pilot studies, presumably watershed studies and guidance follow from that. So the interconnection among these three types is really important.
Yeah, and I think in the way that Ajay presented it, he really sees them being in communication with each other, and that's what those arrows are when he uses that. But go ahead to the next one. The point, of course, that I would make is that the arrows are the network, right? And the ability to connect everything together. So you have these nodes of activity where you have a group that's pursuing a study or is building a pilot project, right? And the flow back and forth between these, the people involved, the organizations involved, and the topics involved really comes down these arrows. And if I'm going to infect all of you with this, when you look at least when I look at diagrams of information, or a network diagram of people, right, a institutional org chart, like we usually look at the boxes. We don't always look at the arrows, and it's the arrows that are really interesting, right? I mean, the boxes are important, but how they're connected to each other is something we don't really spend a lot of conscious time on. And when you focus on making sure that your connections are strong, right, all the boxes become stronger from those connections, right? So when I saw him present this slide during our prep for the call 2 weeks ago, I immediately was like, oh, the arrows are the network. So, okay, next slide. So what's happening right now is department has conducted interviews with a small group of stakeholders about the network, and myself and my colleague Megan, who I think is listening in, we're conducting those interviews, and we've provided a report to DWR from that group. Anybody who's on the call that was interviewed, thank you. You remain anonymous in this space unless you want to out yourself. But we are also working on we have a survey that parallels what the interviews really were able to share to the department. And following this meeting, we will widely distribute that survey. It's been written to be meaningful and reflect some of the lessons that the RAC shared, some of the stuff that we've been talking about today. It hopefully takes you a brief amount of time, but still it's something that we hope you'll focus on, because the group that decided to sign in for LunchMAR, you're part of the group that I imagine will be most invested in the network as it establishes itself, and this survey will really help to do that. Next slide. So I've got 2 slides of the prompts that we've been asking on the interviews. You'll see echoes of this in the survey when it's time. Oh, and the survey link is now in the group chat, and don't go do it until I'm done talking, because then you'll be distracted, either from the survey or from me. Jenny? All right, so these are the interview prompts, and again, you'll see echoes of this in the survey. So, first we're just asking people how familiar they are with the efforts of FloodMAR to date. And then we ask people about whether there's this recommendation to have a FloodMAR network, and we share with them what the RAC said. We share with them what the RAC said, and then we ask them about what they think of that idea and what other networks people might belong to and how those networks benefit them. And then we ask people about what benefit they would want to receive from participating in a network and what value they would commit to contribute to benefit others in the network. And this is a key way of thinking about your investment in a network, right? That you need to put something in and get something out, because everyone else will be doing the same, and it's only when people are both giving and getting that the network works to its strongest. Next slide. We ask a little bit about what the FloodMAR network could accomplish, which things it should be trying to help with, and then what should it try to avoid doing. And thinking about it in both directions is a key piece too. There's so much that needs to be thought through with FloodMAR, and the capacity of the network and the people who want to participate to some extent changes the character of what the network should be trying to accomplish. And as you know, it's easy to stretch yourself into too many spaces and then overcommit, and then you're not good anywhere. So how the network can make sure that it's targeted well. And then we also ask a question about how the network could be coordinated, right? And a good network needs to have someone helps coordinate it, not leading it. It's a key distinction that you need a facilitator, an air traffic controller, a moderator, whatever brand name you want to give the person. You need someone who can help coordinate the network's activities, make sure everybody knows the phone number to call and what time the meeting is going to be held, share out the agenda, that kind of thing. The network needs to be led by the people who are in it, but it needs to be coordinated. And we asked people some thoughts about who or what kind of organization would be appropriate as a coordinator for the network. And then we love these kinds of questions when we're doing the social science light that we do with state government is, when you think out 10 years and, we're together and I say, how's the FloodMAR network going? And you say, it's been going fantastic. And then I would say, what stories would you share? Uh-oh. Side talk. What stories would you share about the future that would reflect that success, right? And it's a neat way to kind of cast yourself into the future in a way that will help us go back to figuring out what to say, what to build now, I should say. So some of the emergent interview themes, next slide, have been redacted. They're actually here. Underneath this black is some of the themes that came out of our report that we've provided to DWR, but we decided not to share them during this talk because we wanted those of you taking the survey to be in a blue sky space and answering those questions from your own instincts and thoughts and the stuff you've considered in the past. We will work to include the survey results alongside the results of the interviews in a package that we think will do a really nice job of planting the seed for how the network builds out. Next slide. So we have a next poll here, and this is getting towards the end of my talk, so this is great. I got one poll here, and then we'll have some time for open mic and Q&A. So go ahead with that poll. Just in case somebody's not reading, I am ready to receive this amazing survey from DWR and complete it in a timely way to make sure that my voice is part of the effort to establish a FloodMAR network. For sure, no way.
When you read it this way, Mike, I don't know how anybody can say no to you.
I'm a thumb on the scale, I suppose.
So we're just waiting on a few more votes to come in. There was a question about the connection between the network and the RAC in the chat.
Yeah, I saw that flashback pie too.
Yeah.
That's more of a Jenny question, I think, than me, but
yes.
Let's make sure we get this poll squared away.
Yep, it's almost done. A couple more. All right, and here you go.
All right. Okay, I see you no ways. Somebody's playful out there. Well, I appreciate that. That's really great to see a 92%.
Mhm.
What can you get 92% of people to agree to do other than this, right? Cats or dogs, you wouldn't get 92%. Right? Fish or chicken, you wouldn't get 92%. All right, next slide. And go ahead and hit it. All right. Oh, wait, you missed one.
Yep.
Oh, that's right, one more poll.
Mhm.
Let's see it.
Okay.
Now that 92% of you said yes, I will respond quickly to the survey when it arrives because I am invested in helping the LunchMAR network develop. Yes, I promise. Ugh, blurg.
It's very much a leading question, Mike.
I know.
All right, and
That's how we play around here.
Everybody's rushing to answer that.
Nice.
A few more. And you have a couple of minutes to wrap up.
That's great. Yeah, I would love to just get into Q&A. And maybe that first question I can get, yay. Wait a minute. Somebody said yes, they want to answer the survey, who then said ugh and blurg. Uh-oh, that's not good. We're up from 8% to 10%.
I
All
don't
right.
know, this is someone who's demonstrating real commitment. They don't want to do a survey, but they'll do it anyway because
That's true. Okay, I'm with you there.
Mike, this year, we had a few people drop off the call.
So okay, so the
same
numbers are meaningless. That's all right. Some of these surveys are fun. It's just to get people paying attention. But it's really a key step that we had 100 people sign into LunchMAR to hear about the possibility of a network. And I think everybody who works in California water in general, I think just in their gut understands the value of the networks. We are also interconnected one way or another in the work that we do every day, and knowing each other and being able to share tips and secrets. And then every time we get a chance to get together, even when it's in our living rooms on Zoom, we all are eager to do it because we all benefit from this kind of work. So I'm really excited to have been playing this role in support of the department as they pursue that recommendation of the RAC. And with the survey now out in the field, we hope everyone here and others will respond to it and give us a little bit more to go on. And I imagine coming up in the future, there'll be more steps towards making the network formal in a way that allows people to buy in and set the expectations of people, what people are ready to give and what they're hoping to get, and it can move forward. We've been talking about it being a great idea, and over again we have people agreeing that it's a great idea, and I think we're getting to the point now where we probably have, following the survey, we'll have the information we need really to establish something great that lives on from those recommendations of the RAC. And I guess that I'm trying to tee up the next answer from Jenny about the distinction between the network and the RAC.
Yeah, this is Jenny. We really wanted the network to build upon the RAC, and I said that in the chat. We had asked the RAC members, and for folks that aren't familiar with the RAC, our research advisory committee, we had a state and non-state co-chair representing 13 themes that we brought together to really frame up research and data development needs to progress LunchMAR. And we had asked them to commit to 3 or 4 meetings over about a 9-month period. And through that process, released a research and data development plan. I can share a link to that in the Zoom group chat. And once the document was out and we had those 4 meetings, we kind of officially disbanded the RAC, although we've still been using it as a point to get information and share information and kind of loosely keep the group intact, but we're hoping that the network expands on the RAC. And the RAC had 13 subcommittees that represented over 200 people. So, we're hoping to cast that net even wider.
Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah, and I'll kick off with questions. There was another question from the chat from the beginning of the presentation, if you guys don't mind. We had a question for Mike. Can you say more about what is the proposed common defined purpose of the FloodMAR network? Maybe that is underway, but are there any initial thoughts?
Well, so, uh-oh, I'm getting an echo from somewhere. The initial thoughts out of the Research Advisory Committee are in the RDD plan, and they really mirrored a number of the things that the Research Advisory Committee was thinking about. So some of those ideas are there that situated some of our initial discussions with people, but in general, the response has been, and as you saw in one of the polls here, the interest in the pilot studies that we're hearing from implementers, people who are eager to start building stuff and getting these projects out on the field. They were underrepresented, I think, in the Research Advisory Committee, and are maybe overrepresented in the conversations we're having now. There's fewer research faculty from the universities participating in these discussions, at least to date, than were in the Research Advisory Committee. So when you look at the RDD plan, some of the ideas that were there for what the network could accomplish, those are one of the bases from which we're starting. As you saw, we've been asking that question of the people we've interviewed, and it's again in the survey, asking people to kind of make some assessments of what kinds of activities would be appropriate. And we're trying not to, we're not trying to share from the interviews yet until we get the surveys, because the interviews has been a relatively small number of people. And this call, and then of course anything that comes from an email distribution, we'll get significantly greater number of people weighing in. So you'll see when you get to the survey that there's a suite of potential things that seem to be at the core of the way folks are thinking, but I'll leave it till you're looking at the survey to talk about those.
Great, thank you. And Jenny just posted the link to the RDD plan for anybody who wants to look that up. So we have some time if anyone wants to share any thoughts, comments, questions for Mike. Also, if there are any related upcoming events that you want to broadcast, we'd love to hear it in the name of connecting and creating a community.
Actually, I'm now looking at the question that Glenn asked that you read, and I do want to add one thing to it about this common defined purpose. You know, in order for people really to invest their organizations in a network, they need to be there to constitute what its intentions will be, right? And rather than having an outside party design the network's goals and then ask people to buy in or not, it's much better to bring people together who believe that there is a potential for utility and success. Somebody who wants a network for a reason. They need to come together with other people who want a network for a reason, and together grapple with what those reasons are and what's the right layout. We could survey and then create something and then post it and ask people to buy in. But that's a way, that is a less successful way to establish a network than it is to have the people in it come together and grapple in conversation with one another about what the right contours are. So the surveys are helping us establish kind of a topic space, but there will need to be a step in the future where the people who are ready to buy in, seeing that topic space and saying, yeah, I think this is something that our organization is ready to buy into and we can invest and gain from this. They all need to come together and wrestle over and write down what they're all ready to do together. And that's the way you build a network that'll be really strong.
Thanks, Mike. Doug Parker had a question. Did you want to ask that in person? It's fine if you want to unmute and just ask your question. I saw you raised your hand.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Mike. This was really good. I just actually kind of put the question into the chat as well. What scares me about a network is just, this was 13 subcommittees and 200 people. And Romaine had a similar question. I'm a little afraid of getting involved in a network that's trying to do too much. And how do we design it so that there's sub-networks or nodes so that people can focus on the areas that they're interested in? I didn't need to care about all 13 subcommittees. I'm glad they existed and did their work. So how do we address that question to keep it maybe something that's not quite so big and scary?
Well, I imagine some of that will have to be organic, right? And if there's enough folks like you, right, who come together in a room and you and 6 people are like, we desperately need this network to focus on flood risk management issues, right? And across the room, there's 6 other people who are like, yeah, we really need a network that's going to focus on the social and environmental justice dimensions of this, right? You may discover after that meeting that you've got 2 networks that need to be formed, right? And or maybe only one, and the rest of you just go back to having the conversation threads that you were having, right? So I think to some extent it needs to be developed by the people who are ready to buy in, and you people vote with their feet, right? And or I suppose with their logins nowadays, right? And when it's time to say, like, we're having a one-day workshop where people who are ready to invest themselves in a FloodMAR network are going to gather and build a consensus vision of what the network's going to do and what it's not going to do. Whoever comes that day are the ones who are going to make the decisions about what's going to happen, and then it'll start rolling on its own. The Roundtable of Regions in the IRWM program is a really great example of a network, and it formed itself into a network organically over time. It didn't have the running start that we have going now with FloodMAR network, but it really it polices its own boundaries. The people who participate stretch into the spaces that they together want to stretch into, and then they avoid the places that they want to avoid. And it's really an organic process that's done by the people who are committed and investing in the whole effort. So I don't know if that's a satisfying answer to you, Doug, but that's kind of the way it plays out, is that the people choose.
I think that works well, thanks.
Great, thank you. So we have a few more minutes. If anybody else wants to raise their hand and ask a question in person, it would be great to hear from you, whether it's in response to Mike, and also want to make sure that we hear about upcoming events. So Thomas, go ahead.
Thank you. I had an announcement to make, and I'm going to say up front, Jen allowed me to make this announcement. This is slightly related to FloodMAR. We are offering a short course that provides an introduction to groundwater watersheds and groundwater sustainability plans as a COVID special online starting at the end of the month. Registration is going to be available at registration.ucdavis.edu sometime in the next day. We'll be starting May 21st. I just wanted to let you know, if you are interested or if you know folks that are in this process and don't have a background in hydrology or water science and would like to know more about how groundwater works, how watershed works, what the tools are that we use, and how that all then fits into a groundwater sustainability plan and how these plans are designed, is a good opportunity to sort of get an overview in all of these processes, especially good for folks that are on many of these advisory committees that work with groundwater sustainability plans or some of these FloodMAR projects.
Great,
So
thanks, Thomas. You're going to put the link in the chat?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay.
It'll be up in the next day.
Great, thank you. Any other announcements, anything you want to share related to our topic? All right.
Marie, this is Jenny.
Okay.
I'll share in the chat a couple links that I have, and I hope that people use this venue also to share research articles or things that they just found interesting that are related to FloodMAR. And we'll start keeping, hopefully a library of the things that we talk about. And I hope to look at some new software for communication and collaboration to kind of house this. For those of you that are learning Mural as a collaboration tool. I hope to put together a Mural board that will kind of provide a backbone for our LunchMAR efforts, for people to sign up or suggest topics for future meetings, and also just provide links to related efforts out there. And recently 2 articles kind of came across my desk that this group might be interested in. One was an April 16th article posted online for Science Magazine that discusses using floodwater for managed aquifer recharge and reflects many of the concepts and concerns covered in past LunchMAR events, the RIC meetings, and our R&DD plan. So I will share a link to that. Several members of our Research Advisory Committee were quoted in that article. And another article just in the last couple weeks, PPIC shared a blog post that explored auctions as a method for allocating floodwaters as an alternative to the first come, first served permanent water rights process that I found pretty interesting, and I thought others in this group would too. And I see some other folks that are posting articles, so great. But hopefully we can use this forum as a little bit of information sharing as well.
Great. Thanks, Jenny.
Actually, I have an announcement too on behalf of DWR. The Tribal Policy Advisor's Office and the Division of Regional Assistance is doing a 3-part Tribal Regional Water Management webinar. The dates are May 19th, 26th, and June 2nd. It's 9 to noon, all 3 days. And there's a flyer going around and registration information out there. I don't have a web link to give you, but if you're interested or you have stakeholders who might be interested, definitely pass it along.
All right, great. And just want to encourage everyone to share any links or information on the chat. We will summarize that and share those resources with everyone. So Jenny, I'm going to turn it to you to close us out today. Thanks, Mike, for the presentation. Very curious to see what the survey results and input that you're receiving will look like. So thank you very much. Go ahead, Jenny.
All right, thanks, Marie. Thanks, Mike. Greatly appreciate your time to share the work that you've been doing on networks. I'd also like to thank your colleague, Megan Murray, who I know is participating as well, and the work that you guys did on the interviews and kind of pulling together this concept of a LunchMAR network that hopefully will bring this community together in some really good connectors for how we share information and progress project implementation. Also like to thank all the participants. I think I saw a peak of 102, so glad to see that. Glad to see that there's lots of interest, and I hope you stay engaged in LunchMAR and LunchMAR. I will send out a calendar invite for the LunchMAR series. So if you would like to stay engaged in LunchMAR, opt in, you can email me. My email's on the slides. I'll also send out an email with a link to the survey. So that'll be the last link that'll go to everyone. I think I've been using the email list from our April webinar. That's I think 250 people. So I'm giving folks the opportunity to opt in to this LunchMAR meeting series if they don't want to receive continued information from DWR. And as I said before, we're exploring new tools for remote collaboration and information sharing for LunchMAR, you know, including a mural board, potential interest in a LinkedIn group or a SharePoint site for sharing information and documents. So lastly, please take the network survey, and thanks again. Our last closing poll is just kind of feedback on this event, if the presentations were relevant to the work that you would do and how you'd like to continue to engage. So we'll close on this final thank you. I'll stay on the chat for a few minutes and just kind of catch up if I missed any questions. But thanks for a successful inaugural LunchMAR.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.